My name is Steve Viachica. I'm an Associate Professor of Instructional and Performance Technology here at Boise State University. It's my honor and privilege to introduce our guest today, Dr. Roger Kaufman. I met Roger at ISPI. As a performance improvement practitioner, I've drawn on his work for years. Every time I work with a client to untangle means and ends, I breathe a sigh of thanks for Roger's many contributions. I've invited Roger to spend time with us today because of the breadth and the depth of his knowledge of needs assessment. I've also invited him because our IPT 536 Foundations courses are discussing his organizational elements model this week as part of our time on general systems theory. Roger has worked as a professor. He's also a consultant to industry, universities, government agencies, nonprofits, and the military. And Roger knows how to speak HPT to senior officials and executives in ways that have them listening to what we can offer. During his time with us, Dr. Kaufman will address the following topics: his background and how he came to HPT, an application of the OEM, and your questions. Roger, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Steve, thank you for your bravery for asking me. And do I really have to cover those kinds of boring things, or can we talk about stuff like professional baseball and football and things like that?
Roger, you are the presenter, and you are now in charge.
Okay. Well, thanks to you, and thanks to the class for putting up with me for about an hour. It's interesting that we can't all talk at the same time, but I surely would like to make this interactive. Frankly, if there's anything I say that you don't believe, you want me to further justify, or you have an alternative, I'd like you to participate as we would if this was a real seminar among colleagues. How did I get into this business? If I knew the group better, I'd start off with an off-color joke, but I'll pass up on that. I guess I started when I was ending up in industry, and because my background was in experimental and industrial psychology, I ended up in the training function. And the training function was very frustrating to me because I was never quite sure that what we were training was actually functional in the operational world. So we developed training systems. For instance, I was one of the first people to work on the mercury capsule. They got angry at me because I looked at the panels, the enunciator panels, and found out that everything was in 10-point type, which you could hardly read when things were good, but when you were in vibration mode, you couldn't see anything at all. But engineers seem to have an apathy for things pragmatic like human engineering. And so we decided that with the Martin Company, earlier with Boeing, that we really had to do what was then called human engineering, and that is design operations for human operability. As I later left, I got up to be Assistant Vice President for Engineering at Douglas Aircraft, and then ended up going with one of the unsung greats in this field, Robert E. Corrigan. I went to Douglas Aircraft, and where he and I wrote the first book, Why System Engineering. And notice that's the singular, not plural, like most of our sources say. And later on went off to U.S. International University. I was still interested in this question of how do we know what we're training is really useful? And I was brought to stark reality by my then 5-year-old son. And I hope some of you have some children and maybe can identify with this. We were driving down Interstate 5, and as like every 4 or 5-year-olds want to do, he started with, "Why, Daddy?" And he asked me a question, and I told him why, and then he said, "Why?" And then I answered him again, and then he said, "Why?" And infuriating, because about that time I realized that I was running out of reasons other than I said so. That was inadequate, and our son wasn't going to put up with that anyway. So I started looking into the relationship between what we use in our operations, what we do, like things like instructional design and development, what we produce, based upon measurable objectives. And then I say, well, how do we know the objectives are right? So I started looking at what was then called organizational objectives. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if those building block objectives linked to what the organization claimed it was going to deliver? So we started looking at that alignment. And then it occurred to me, in the mode of what my son had encouraged me to do, asking why, how do we know if the organization's objectives are valid? At one time, most people would laugh at that, and then all we have to do is think about Lehman Brothers and all kinds of fiascos where everybody, if they participated in adding to the accomplishment of the organization's objectives, you'd run the Titanic into the iceberg. In the case of Wall Street, they ran Wall Street right into a world financial collapse. So this business about relating external societal value added and then using that as a common North Star to decide what the organization can and should deliver, and then what are the building block results of that, and then look at the methods and means we can use to get there, and then we look at the resources. That's sort of backwards. That starts from outside in. And so when I went from Douglas Aircraft to U.S. International University, and then later to Florida State University, this quest constantly was interesting me. And I once wrote an article called From How to What to Why to try to explain this kind of link, and then later on started formalizing that with what Steve mentioned, the Organizational Elements Model, the OEM, which has 5 levels. And I like to start with the outside, the mega or societal level, then inside to the macro, and then the building block results, which is the micro, and then processes and inputs. And then along the way, when I was working with Bob Corrigan, we started getting into things like a Job Corps, which was a fascinating kind of application to our business. And with Job Corps, with Corrigan, they started talking about, well, needs assessment. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, what does the client think they need? And I said, how do they know? And so I came up with what some people are really angry at me about, that I define need as a noun, as a gap between current results and desired or required results. And you do a needs assessment, look at the gaps and results and the impact and consequences at the mega, macro, and micro level. And by that kind of alignment, we can really make better sure that where we're headed is where we should be headed, and then align the building block, what we can deliver, the building block results, and then make sure we pick the right methods and means and activities and acquire the right resources. And so I've talked too long. Steve, what next would you like me to obscure?
I think it would be really nice if you were to take one of the client situations that you've dealt with, maybe, and then apply these needs assessment concepts and perhaps the OEM in a way that helps us see how that works, and how that works in terms of a context where, you know, you've got a real client, you've got a real organization, and so you're handling both the needs assessment or the OEM space at the same time you're handling the consulting space.
Maybe then instead of this generic one that I derived, maybe I should use one that we actually applied on Monday. What do I do? Get out of this and get back into my well, why don't I just use this one and then give the case in point?
Then what you're going to need to do is set up your there's a window on your screen where you can click to show us what's on your screen, and you haven't done that yet.
Show my screen. Okay.
And you may want to show, there we go. And now you're locked and loaded, and you can, you're ready to go.
All right. Steve, would you since I can't see you or those people who are attending, would you let me know if people's eyes glaze over or they're falling asleep or
Yes.
getting nervous? Okay.
And I will also funnel questions to you as I see them appearing either as raised hands or items in the chat log.
Okay. So you can see what I have on the screen here.
Yes.
Okay. Little background. A week ago today, I got a call from the government of Panama. They wanted to know if I could come down and talk to the Minister of Tourism about whether the mega planning, this approach, could be used to transform the city of Colón. Colón is on the Caribbean coast. It's the easternmost entrance to the Panama Canal. And they said it's a war zone. It has the second largest free zone in the world. A lot of money goes through there, amount of shipping. The canal either starts or stops there depending upon your transformation. But the city of Colón is uninhabitable. And they feel that that's a shame for what's rapidly becoming a first world country. And so let's talk about mega planning. And so I developed this, and I've modified it, cleaned it up to take off the references to Colón. But the concept of change, choices, and consequences. And that's code for defining and achieving measurable value or creating wealth. You can see on this one, too, some of my current affiliations. I'm a distinguished research professor at the Sonora Institute of Technology in Mexico, which is interesting enough for over 16 years I've been applying mega planning. About 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I got requested to come down, give a workshop presentation on mega planning, and the rector, Gonzalo Rodriguez, who's a pleasure to work with because he's smarter than I am, and that's great. And even though he's an economist, he's terrific. And he said, you know, we've been using your model at that time for 11 years, and it's worked. How about working with us to apply your model? And I said, tell me more. He said, well, I can't count on the Mexican government and the Sonora government to keep me properly funded, but your model calls for making money and doing societal good, and they must be interrelated, and I want your help. And I said, tell me about that. And he said, what do you want done? I said, and he said, no, that's why you're here, you tell me. So I went off and designed an approach which has ended up with basically the four principal peoples in it. One is Mariano Bernardes, who is a Porteño. He's an Argentinian. Ingrid Guerrero Lopez, and I think Steve did. Does Ingrid do some teaching for you, or did at one time?
I think she's taught a course for us, but she's at Wayne State now, right?
Right, she is. And myself, and then Bob Carlton has been doing some teaching for us, and Dale Brethauer. So what we have designed is a PhD in this, an MBA in this, a Performance Improvement Institute, which is applied research and development, which now has over 20 sponsors, including the largest veterinary medicine people in Mexico, the largest pork producer, two of the largest builders, all applying mega planning. At one time, we tried to get Boise State interested in a joint program, but apparently you all weren't ready to do a PhD yet. But I sure would like to tap in on your faculty to do that at some point in time. I'm also a professor emeritus at Florida State University. I'm consulting faculty at Excelsior College in business and technology. And every once in a while, I try to do my own thing. But this is about change, choices, and consequences. And see if I can get this to advance. There it is. We talk about 3 C's of success. Change, and you know what that is about. You know, one wag said, change is inevitable except from a vending machine, and I believe that. But, you know, we're all faced with the change, and we can either be the masters of it or the victims of it. But it's happening. And all we have to do is look, well, it's close. I think the world headquarters of Albertsons is there in Boise, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you can see what kinds of changes they're going through in this world. The idea of Whole Foods got to them and to Walmart, and now they're all starting whole food kinds of activities, moving towards health and well-being. So change is inevitable. Then we have choices. What do we do about that? Are we going to be the masters or the victim of it? And then there are consequences. What happens? What impact is there for individuals, organizations, and our shared society? And this means our world changes and is changeable. And let's review some of the realities that it provides us with. This is what we were talking about in Cologne. And the minister was a really interesting guy. You know, when you walk into those situations, you never know what you're going to end up with. Many years ago, I was invited to the superintendent of public instruction for Utah. And I was issued in, and he said, Dr. Kaufman, good to meet you. But before we start, I want to let you know that in Utah, we have the most dedicated teachers of any state in the union. And I said, oh boy, here we go. And he said, unfortunately, they're almost all incompetent. And what we have to do is help them be competent. So sometimes clients pleasantly surprise you. And they were wonderful to work with. Let's talk about some templates, the new realities of strategic planning and thinking. Tomorrow's not a linear projection of yesterday. You can't solve today's problem with the same paradigms and tools that created them. Somebody said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But it's amazing how even the gurus of management consulting firms and authors talk about cheaper, faster, better, but they never deal with right. So what we're trying to do often is just increase our efficiency and not asking questions about effectiveness. After September 11th, we know we can no longer just focus on individual performance improvement or a systems approach. And this is where we might get tricky and might have some questions, Steve. I make a distinction between a system approach and a systems approach. In the literature, they're used almost interchangeably. To me, a system approach starts with mega societal value added. The systems approaches are optimizing on those contributors. Everything we use, do, and produce and deliver must add value at the societal level, the mega level, the system approach. And we're not alone in this anymore. When I first started writing about this in '79, actually in a book, Needs Assessment with Fenwick English, who's now at University of North Carolina, the people thought I was nuts. Societal value added. In fact, 2 months ago, one of the best consultants in change, you said you were dealing with change management, Steve. One of the biggest names in the field said, well, this mega stuff is a bridge too far. Our clients aren't ready for it yet. And yet now I just read an article in the in last week's Newsweek magazine called How to Build a Happy Company. And this is about Google. And let me quote it. The author, says, Google is a prime example of what I call a double bottom line company, an organization that measures its success by both its fiscal results and its positive impact on humanity. So this concept of mega, societal value added, is, I hope, approaching the tipping point. But that's what I mean by a system approach, where the primary client and beneficiary of society now in the future. And a systems approach means to optimize one of the parts of that. One example might be for people to design the hell out of courses in your master's program and make them instructionally designed, meeting all the criteria, the ISPI 10 variables or attributes, and not asking what kind of skills, knowledge, and attitudes do the graduates have to have in their life and as they go out into the world, and what are they going to go into, and what about those organizations? Are they going to add value or subtract value from society? So that's one of my givens. Useful change has to add value for all internal and external partners. And there are two bottom lines for any organization, conventional and societal. That's what this article was saying. We've been talking about it for some time. And Mariano Bernaves has developed a business case model which exactly gets terrific metrics for this. As we were explaining it to the Minister of Tourism in Panama City, Panama, one of the members of our team said, and he said, well, you know, is this too idealistic? And he said, well, why don't you look at it as developing a business case for societal change, which I wish I had said it, but I didn't, but Adam Kotensky did. There's some more new realities. Tom Peters said it's easier to kill an organization than it is to change it. Peter Drucker, and this is really important, about this not going to mega. We're just trying to make things cheaper, faster, better. It says we are now getting better and better at doing that which should not be done at all. Anybody out there in the crowd know about that? If you embrace the past, you cannot produce the future. And this is a really vital one. If you can't predict the future, create it. Peter Drucker, who I have long admired. Isn't that interesting? Well, you can't predict the future. Well, then create it. Think globally as you act locally, and ask if my organization is the solution, what's the problem? And then fix the problem, don't fix the blame. And a little bit when we get into arguments, especially, for instance, you could hear it on global warming. If everybody's entitled to their own opinion but not to their own data, and after the spectacular scandal about East Anglia University's climate research organization, where they found out that they were frigging the data, the famous hockey stick was cherry-picked data, and they left out important points. They found out that the melting of the Himalayan glaciers, there's no science behind it at all, but was by two explorers who thought it was happening. And please recall that East Anglia, this is where Al Gore got his data, and this is where the United Nations got theirs, and now the whole data set is suspect. So one of the things about our field, and I know you're getting this at Boise State, is this is all about facts and research-driven data, not about just opinions. Steve, where am I going wrong so far?
You got a couple comments going agree and fully agree and holler, holler, holler. So I think you're cruising in the right direction.
Okay. Nobody's storming to put an axe through the system, are they?
And I haven't seen one appearing out of this side of my computer screen either. Okay,
good. I suggest there's three basic templates to guide us. One is the Organizational Elements Model, or OEM, for finding direction, where you link what's good for society with what an organization can deliver, the building block results, the process and activities to get there, and the resources. And that was one of the things that Steve mentioned early on. And the 6 critical success factors for strategic thinking and planning. And a 6-step problem-solving process. And if we can, Steve, if you think it's useful, we could look at the Organizational Elements Model and see what it is. Is that useful at this point, or is that getting into too much detail?
I'd like to see an example of that and have one coming from you along with your insights about the model and how you use it.
Sure. let's look at the first one. Do you commit to deliver organizational contributions that add value for society? Many years ago, I was making very good money as a consultant to Arthur Anderson, and going up to St. Charles and being picked up in stretch limousines and talking to their senior managers. And one day I got a call from them saying, well, Roger, we like your needs assessment model and we like the problem solving, but this mega stuff, that's not really what our clients are ready for. And I said, you know, you ought to be telling clients not what they want to hear, but what they should hear. And they said, no, but next time, please, let's not talk about the mega stuff. And I said, why don't we part company? Because I think it's absolutely imperative. And so we did. And about 11 months before they started crashing, I got a call from the managing partner and said, excuse me, well, Roger, I think we're ready to talk about mega. And I said, it's too late. You ought to be planning your own funeral. And as we know, they collapsed. They were not looking at mega, or nor did they want their clients to look at mega, and they paid dearly for it. We've done this, for instance, with a number of organizations. One of the things that I did for the Coast Guard is decision making under crisis situations. And so one of the quick things I said, what you're about to do, is it going to take us closer or further away from mega? So this is really important. And recently, the international practice director of McKinsey & Company called it the largest contract. He said, mega, adding value to society, is not a side issue or a bolt-on. It is the core of what every organization has to do. And as Dale Brethauer says, if you're not adding value to society, you're subtracting value. Now think for a moment about what Toyota and Lexus are going through. Do you think they were thinking about societal value added when they allowed the accelerator problem to go on, and now they've stopped the sale of their large 7-passenger SUV because it got rated as a do not buy from Consumers Reports? So this is absolutely vital, that everything an organization uses, does, produces, and delivers must add measurable value to society. And I think Dale Brethauer is exactly right when he says if you're not adding value to society, you're subtracting value. Just think for a moment about what happens if mega was not the primary consideration of restaurants that you go to, food stores, your dentist, your physician. And if we expect that of them, why shouldn't they expect it from us? Now how many blank stares am I getting, Steve?
I don't see any.
Okay. Okay. The next one is, do you commit to deliver organizational contributions that have the quality required by your external partners? I call that the macro level. And this is what you deliver outside of your organization. What are your organizational objectives? At Boise State, this is when Steve and the rest of the faculty think that you've performed up to standard, and they stamp a graduate on your forehead. That's what they deliver outside of themselves. You commit to produce internal results that have the quality required by your internal partners. I call that micro. Now, just out of curiosity, how many people think that that we can stop at micro and let somebody else worry about macro and mega? How many people think we can stop with organizational objectives like be world class or be the producer of choice, and not look at the value that it adds or subtracts to society? So one of our colleagues, Danny Langdon, talked about alignment. And this alignment between mega, macro, and micro is absolutely essential. Do you commit to have efficient internal processes, programs, projects, and activities? Processes. And then do you commit to create and ensure the quality and appropriateness of the human capital and physical resources available? If I could interact with you, I'd like you to say, which ones of these do we not have to deal with rigorously, formally, and measurably? Anybody have any ideas? What happens when we...
Chris is saying we should focus on them all.
That's right, and they're all equally important. They're all equally important. You can't leave in any of them out.
And Carol's saying we should focus on them all, but we frequently don't.
I agree totally. And that's why some of our plan change activities go off the rail.
And I think it's interesting how you're using the OEM as a method by which to get commitment and buy-in for this kind of operation. And Richard is asking, which of these do we neglect the most?
You know, I've asked people that, and usually they say that the one that they deal with the least, and usually not formally at all, are the mega, and then the inputs. The ending of. We're very good about processes, and we're very good increasingly about the micro, and then it gets fuzzy in either direction. And next time you go in for heart surgery, you just don't want the surgeon, you don't want her forgetting about aligning all of these doing.
Carol's asking if you could provide an example of some things that fit at each one of these levels.
Sure. From what kind of context would she like? Would she like education, or would she like automobile manufacturing?
I think something that would be along the lines of a workplace setting, so maybe your automobile manufacturing example. Okay.
By the way, a few years ago, I was invited to Detroit, and in the room were people from GM, Ford, and Chrysler. And I couldn't get them to even think about Mega. I even reminded them of the Pinto fiasco many years ago. And they said, no, all we have to do is put good stuff in the marketplace. Well, let's start out. Well, most people will start with the processes. CAM, CAD for design, the robotics for production, the use of what you're learning at Boise State in terms of designing workplaces and learning opportunities. Those are processes. But then you say, well, wait a minute, who are we going to deal with? And so you'd say, well, those are the inputs, the human capital and physical resources. So we have to back off a little bit. But let's say you've been asked to design a human performance system. And what do you do about this? Well, I would suggest the first thing you say is, well, if Chrysler Corporation is the solution, what's the problem? And the client will probably look at you, what do you mean? I said, well, what are you delivering to the client, and how safe and effective and efficient is it? Well, we think it's a good product. I said, well, how come you're down to only about 20% of the market? And then you get them to look at the gaps between the safety and consumer acceptance now and what it should be to be a safe, viable vehicle. See the needs assessment coming in? And then you back that down and you say, well, what should we be delivering? We used to do great with the minivans, but they've been replaced by SUVs. That doesn't make any difference. We're delivering 150,000 units a month of the minivans because we do a great job at that. And you say, well, okay, let's look at the gap between what we're delivering and what actually gets sold. And then you come back and say, well, okay, now that we've got a vehicle that we think is safe and attractive, what are the building blocks of that? Well, we got engines, we've got drive lines, we've got steering wheels, we've got seats, we've got shells, headlights. Those are the building blocks that we have to independently design to standards. Excuse me, the standards that you can deliver outside of yourself and will be safe and be accepted by the client. Say, well, okay, now to build these pieces, what about the processes? Well, let's see. Well, we have manufacturing. We can use the robotics we talked about earlier. We have a production line. We have quality control inspecting going on all the time. So we have to fabricate these. And maybe one of the processes we do is we subcontract to other people to deliver stuff. Okay, to get this done, including maybe some on-the-job training and some human resource development, what do we have to deal with? And what we use? And then we can talk about the people, the money, and the resources. And those are the inputs. So our job is to align all of these things. But if you start with mega, you're making sure that you're not developing something that that you can't sell. Many years ago, I was working with Texas Instruments, and they had the most marvelous array of electronic things. And I said, how are they selling? And so we went down to the company store, and these are the most amazing things that were there because they couldn't sell them on the outside, and we came to call those customerless products because they did not align mega, macro, micro processes and inputs. Does that help, or does that make things worse?
I can say that that's helping me because I think there are a couple things that are going on here. One, there's this notion of getting a commitment to a shared reality where we can work together. Right. Two, it's trying to determine where we're going so that we can do the third thing, which is align all these different components in a way that gets us to what we think is the place where we want to be.
Yep, exactly.
And Carol says, thank you, and this has been really helpful.
Okay. Does that mean I should stop or keep going?
I think keeping going would be good.
Okay.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to verify with you, because this often comes up when we're using the OEM, is that I understand as a general rule of thumb, you want to start with the mega level outcomes and then work backwards. But
exactly.
When you were doing some sense making in terms of walking through different parts of this, what I saw is you started with the end and then you went to the beginning and then you went back to the end again, and the end result is you're able to put all these things so that the right kind of information appears in the right cell in a way that's going to get commitment and alignment. But it's not like following the steps of a recipe where you start with outcome, work your way down, and call it a slam dunk and think you're done.
That's exactly correct. What I generally do is start, if I have to, where they want you to. For instance, you said a workplace example, so that's where I went to. In some places, for instance, with the Minister of Tourism, I started at Mega with him and part of his staff because I thought that's exactly where where I wanted to start with. And he wanted to move down to process, and then I said, okay, yes, and let's go back. So I'm pragmatic. I'll start any place somebody wants to, but sooner or later I'm going to get it all. Okay?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Now here's the second template, 6 critical success factors. One, don't assume that what worked in the past will work now. Get out of your comfort zone and be open to change. Use an ideal vision as the underlying basis for planning. Don't be limited to your organization. An ideal vision, if we have time, I'll show you. It's derived from asking people from almost around the world what kind of world do they want for their children and grandchildren. So that's mega is defined by an ideal vision like that. Third is differentiate between ends and means. Steve, you mentioned earlier, focus on what before you select how. Prepare objectives, including ideal vision and mission objectives, which are measures of how you'll know when you've arrived. This is the most often violated thing in our field there is. They write what I call NQMOs, not quite measurable objectives, and they usually include statements of process. Using team building and shared decision making, we will. And already they put the solution into it. And objectives are only about ends, results, and consequences. And you do that for all three levels, results levels of the organizational elements model. And there we are. Use all three levels of planning and results. And 6, define need as a gap in results, not as insufficient levels of resources, means, or methods. I used to drive the graduate students nuts, especially here at Florida State University, because every time they use need as a verb, need to, need for, needing, needed, it cost them a quarter. I used to be a dime, but they said this is now, and maybe it should be $1. And it's interesting how in our language, how often we need as a verb. One time, one of the 2 competent psychotherapists that I ever knew in my life, and I've known some, Harold Greenwald, was over the house for dinner. He just joined the faculty at U.S. International University. And I said, Harold, why do I have such a hard time getting people not to use need as a verb? And he said, well, if we psychotherapists are honest with ourselves and honest with each other, we have the same problem. And being a good humanist, I said, oh, good, tell me more about that. He said, well, we get clients coming in all the time, and they sit and they said, I need him, or I need her. And what they've done is they've cut their options down to 1 and don't realize that there might be other alternative ways. And he said they've never really decided what they want to accomplish. And so anytime you see somebody using need as a verb, you know they're jumping right into solution and have cut out almost surely where they're headed, why they want to get there, and how to tell when they've arrived. So those are the 6 critical success factors. Here's the 6-step problem-solving model that looks pretty ordinary. Although I had the chairman of the Department of Chemistry at Stanford many years ago said, no, that's different than the scientific method we use. And I said, oh? He said, yeah, we start right away with hypotheses, and your model shows you how to develop the hypotheses. And so, and notice that this is not linear lockstep. There's not very well articulated dotted lines. So those are the 3 templates. And do we have time, Steve, to talk about the ideal vision?
Roger, this is your show, so if you'd like to, you can.
Okay, well, it's your patience. I see the audience view is 94% of 17 people. What does 94% mean? I've lost 94% or 6 people went away?
Neither. I'm not exactly sure what all those are, but I know that we've got 14 people online with us right now.
Okay. Again, thank you all for putting up with this. The basic ideal vision, which is MEGA, is the world we want to help create for tomorrow's child. Here's the basis of MEGA. There will be no loss of life nor elimination or reduction of levels of well-being, survival, self-sufficiency, and quality of life from any source, but including the following but not limiting to it. Let's think about this one as basically what is MEGA. How many people drove a car today? Many? Wouldn't you like to know that your car was designed to be able to stop when you wanted to stop, that it would steer where you wanted to steer, and that it wouldn't kill you or speed up to 110 miles an hour while being very fuel efficient? Wouldn't you like to know when you went into a store, like a Taco Bell, that you weren't going to get ptomaine poisoning and die? So That's the basis of MEGA. Survival, self-sufficiency, and quality of life. So let's look at some of the macro contributors to it. There will be no loss of life, etc., from war and or riot and or terrorism. But another variable. Unintended human-caused change of the environment. Murder, rape, or crimes of violence, robbery, or destruction of property. Substance abuse. Disease. Starvation or malnutrition. Destructive behavior, including child, partner, spouse, self, elder, or others. A few years ago, my wife suggested I added elder to that list. Accidents, including transportation, home, and business or workplace. Discrimination based on irrelevant variables, including color, race, age, creed, gender, religion, wealth, national origin, or location. Now, most organizations won't deal with all of those, but I think if we were to take the time and look at the organizations that you do work with or will work with, you'll find that each one does something on all of those. As strange as it might seem, Boise State has a plan for war and or riot or terrorism. They have to make sure that those don't happen. I'm sure they have recycling and programs. I'm sure they have rules. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can you apply this to the work you were doing, for example, this week in Panama?
Yes. It turns out that Colon, which used to be a wonderful colonial town, rich in heritage, thriving, started deteriorating. And guess what they have there? They have roving gangs, usually tribes that kill, that kidnap, steal, terrorize, and now they picked up a new avocation, and that is kidnapping, where if you're kidnapped, they put a charge of $150 on you, but they're nice because they usually return you. One of the things that's happening in that community is that the environment is crumbling. There's no recycling. There's sewage is spilling out on the streets. There are murders, rapes, crimes of violence, robbery. There's an ample drug trade. There's a lot of disease. People are poor. There's gangs beating up on other gangs and people. One of the women that attended our meeting on Monday, her uncle was killed 2 weeks ago. He was a lawyer, and they said, "Oops, we shot the wrong guy. We were supposed to get him the lawyer that was working in the next door." Accidents. This is really important there because that's a larger transit center that enters the Panama Canal. And so you can't afford that. The Trans-Panama Railroad runs to there, and there's a lot of offloading and unloading of cargo. And discrimination, I think they have a little bit. They're at many cases at war with the people there with money. So they have all of that, and our challenge is to find a way around that. One of the ways we're going to approach this, Steve, as you know, I'd set out with Dale Brethauer and Richard Gerson to develop a six-pack for HRD Press. It's called HPT. And mine is the first one, called Change, Choice, and Consequences, not surprising. The fifth volume was written by Bob Cartland, who he and a business partner actually turned around HP and British Airways. And in the third chapter, when I was reviewing it, I said, "This is nonsense." He said, change, he said, I want to put a dagger in the heart of one of the worst misconceptions that's out there, that change is difficult and time-consuming. And he said it isn't. If you find the right incentives, the right rewards, it can be very, very fast. And that was a good insight for me, because I think a lot of times what we don't look at is the culture, and we don't look at what people are getting rewards for. I mean, these thugs that are roaming around Cologne, they're making money on this, and we think so does the mayor and the police chief. So you have to change the incentive systems for these people. And so looking at that, we're looking at what incentives now are people individually and collectively getting from what's going on there, and what incentives will it take to turn this around. So this is the ideal vision. One of the consequences is what I just put on. Can you see that, or do I have to read it to you?
We can see it.
Okay. How many want to see it? And I find this is a very useful template in working with myself and clients about which ones of these variables, which from the mega to the macro, what are the gaps that exist, and which ones are we going to close? Here's some, as we say, poverty will not exist. Here's the consequences of implementing an ideal vision. And since it's getting to be shut-up time for Roger, here's the level of planning. Mega, level payoff societal bottom line. Macro, organizational conventional bottom line. And micro-organizational building block or contributions. So I'm saying do needs assessment at these three levels, starting with mega. And what you'll do is, with these top two, you'll get what this author said was happening at Google, and we do all the time, is you have a two bottom line operation. And if you just ask yourself the simple question, will this get us closer or further away from mega, you can make very, very quick decisions. Steve, I'm just about out of time. What would you, anybody like to keep me honest, or you had no?
Yes, Linda's asked a question, and it reads like this. In an early 1983 article on your holistic planning model,
yes,
break down the different kinds of concerns and activities that people or personnel working at different levels tend to have with regard to the OEM. In it, you showed professional technician levels mostly being involved in inputs, processes, and products. For those of us working in the professional technician level, how can we take advantage of mega thinking to have an impact on what we're doing and make sure it's more aligned up with the OEM model?
Yes. And that is because people tend to see themselves in the center of the universe, and they start where they're getting the rewards. And I think with what we have to do to be both ethical. Stephanie Moore is coming out an applied book about ethics and HBT and mega. If we're not doing this, what are we doing? And so, yeah, you start where you are, but I still don't recant that article, although it's been a long time since I thought about it. People do tend to look first at where they're at, but they have to link at all of it. Somebody was doing their research. I don't even know whether I have that article anymore now.
And to follow up on that, assuming that I'm starting in a professional technician level, how do I move this argument up the organizational food chain in a way that will get the buy-in and the sponsorship I need to address those higher levels?
Of course, I wouldn't use the word need that way, but that's okay.
I understand that. Sorry.
No. What I do is somebody says, you know, well, what we want to do is we want to train people so our rejection rate goes from 3% to not more than 1/2 of 1%, and ideally 0. And you say, okay, good. Now, if we accomplish that, what would the result and consequence of that be? And what you do is you start by asking that question without threatening or challenging them. You move that up one more link. And they said, well, then if we did that, then all the components that we're putting together on this car would go and merge together in a timely way and seamlessly. And then you say, okay, that's good. Now if we were successful at that, what would the result of that be? And the answer might be shut up and go back to work, or it might be, usually is, what that would mean is what we can deliver to our dealerships is a car with very close to 0 defects, which won't have to have any warranty work, and which the customer can buy with confidence. And you say, okay, and then if we deal that almost 0 defect automobile, what would the result of that be? And then they start thinking, oh, you know, if we have a car like that that's energy efficient and safe and attractive, we might get more market share. And guess what? The lawsuits from defective vehicles would go down to 0, and we'd start being the automobile of choice. And everybody would keep their jobs, and we wouldn't foul up the environment and not hurt people. So just by asking, great, if we got that, what would the result of that be? You can just walk them right up the OEM, the results chain.
Thank you. Jen Lupton has a question, and what I'm going to do is give her the mic so that she can, I'm going to try to give her the mic. Oh, Jen, I'm sorry, there's a user interface thing I'm not doing, so I'm going to pose the question that you have. Dr. Kaufman, you mentioned incentive systems to change the behavior of gangs. How do you encourage bosses to implement incentive systems when they say there are no carrots, it's their job?
The answer is you smile at them and put out a contract on them. You know, Lyndon Johnson, for all his failings, had a nice statement: is, "Come, let us reason together." And you can take the attitude of yes and say, yeah, it is my job, and I want to make sure that I do the job so that not only am I successful, but you're successful. Now, what does it take for me in doing this job correctly so your boss says good and sees you as the contributing supervisor that you'd like to be? And that turns it around from them supervising you to you helping them be successful. Usually people react that way not because they're mean or stupid, but because they're afraid. They just don't know how to do anything else. And so if you look at these people as frightened, you can usually better understand what they're doing, why they're doing. And if you know they're afraid, then what you do is you look for ways that you can show them how they can become heroes and you can help them. Is she shaking her head up or down?
She's in Canada with the armed forces, so I can't see what she's doing, but she just typed thank you, as well as Linda, whose question you answered earlier.
Okay, and do we have to, in closing, sing "O Canada," or?
No, but Richard is saying this has been an insightful and enjoyable session. Thanks so much, Roger, Steve, and Ron.
I appreciate that, and Steve, you have my email address, and if anybody has any further questions or clarifications, shoot me an email and I'll try to respond.
Certainly. Thank you, Roger. We appreciate that, and thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your expertise with us. and this podcast, because we'll be taking the recording from this and making it available to our BSU students. So thank you so much for your support and your generosity, and I look forward to seeing you in San Francisco this coming week.
Thank you for the opportunity and the platform, and thank you for your contribution to the field and to the students. I appreciate that. And see you in San Francisco, and thanks again for the students for putting up with me for this little over an hour.
And thank all of you for being here. This ends our webinar presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.